Well, let's get things rolling. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this month's edition of the AEDC Voice webinar. Deeply appreciate you all joining us today. We've got a great show for you today, but first I want to turn it over to our good friends at People AK, formerly AES and BMG, Best Practices by Katie Lowers. Katie, I'm going to hand it over to you right quick.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you all for joining today. Our quick tip of the day has to do with employee well-being and engagement. Gallup describes 5 different dimensions of employee well-being, which we know we could, probably talk about 10, but they describe career, social, financial, community, and physical well-being. And the role that managers and employers play in that is pretty big. If you can address employee engagement, it increases their individual well-being. They are 27% more likely to report excellent performance by their organization, 40% or 45% more likely to report high levels of adaptability in the presence of change, and 59% less likely to look for a job within a different organization in the next 12 months. We think that those are relevant and timely with such a crunch and a need for high quality talent. And so keeping in mind that you can affect the individual well-being and engagement with some simple efforts is really key. And that's all we have.
Well, thanks, Katie. And thanks so much to People AK for their generous sponsorship of AEDC Voice. They make this all possible. They do great work for their clients, and we deeply appreciate their help and support for what we do here at AEDC. Well, let's get right to it. Coming all the way to us, all the way from Iceland, we are joined today in the November AEDC Voice by Hugh Short of PT Capital, who will discuss the COVID-19 impact on the business world, the trends developing as a result, and how they relate to Alaska's economy. In addition, Mr. Short will provide insight into successfully managing a portfolio of assets that represent tourism, technology, and energy services sectors during these unprecedented times we have been living through. Just a quick overview of PT Capital, just to give you a little background. I know Hugh will probably cover a lot of this, but we just wanted to get this started off right so that we're all on the same page. PT Capital is an Alaska-based investment firm which manages a $315 million portfolio as of June 30 of this year of companies operating across the Arctic. The firm is concentrated on investment opportunities in high potential markets of North America and Europe, which include Alaska, the Pacific Northwest, Iceland, and Finland. As an emerging manager, PT Capital has a single-minded drive to invest in great businesses in partnership with global investors and indigenous organizations. A focus on environmental sustainability, gender and race pay equity, and a long-term strategy set PT apart from other private market firms. PT Capital was founded in 2013 by Mr. Short, who currently serves as chairman and CEO. Mr. Short provides investment oversight and guides overall firm strategy. Mr. Short also provides fund investment oversight for both deployment and post-purchase management. He leads capital raises for the fund and guides overall firm strategy. Mr. Short has 20 years of executive lead experience and has closed $920 million in debt and equity investments in oil and gas, telecommunications, hospitality, real estate, and infrastructure throughout the target region. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to this month's AEDC Voice, Mr. Hugh Short.
Thanks, Bill. It is great to be here. It is as you can see, it's 7 p.m. here in Reykjavik. It is an honor to be here with you today. I was asked to do an overview of the COVID experience through 2020, 2021, impacts that we've seen specifically in the sectors that we have in our portfolio. And then beyond that, trends that we're seeing overall, sort of globally from Alaska to Iceland and across the Arctic. Just a quick note on myself. I was born and raised in Bethel, Alaska. I was actually served as the mayor of Bethel 20 years ago, so it's been a long time. My mother is from Elam, Alaska. She is originally a Katungan, Mildred Short. My father is Hugh Short Sr., originally from British Columbia. With that, I believe someone's going to drive some slides here, and then I'm going to try to not put anyone to sleep and just give a sort of a high level overview of the firm and then our portfolio. Hopefully the technology works. There we go. I see something. If we could go to slide 2.
Can you guys see it on your side?
I've got slide 1.
Okay. What about slide 2? Let me. Lady, give me one. I can't necessarily see what you guys are seeing on your end, so.
It just seems to be stuck on
Is it?
1.
Okay.
Not sure if I should try it from my end.
No, if you just give me a quick second, I should be able to navigate this. I'm going to stop sharing and then reshare. Give me 1 second. Hopefully it's not stuck this time.
Well, you have a slide up.
Okay. Are we on slide 2?
No, we're not.
All righty.
Perhaps I can just wing it. How about that? And I can talk through the slides and certainly give, oh, there we go. We got something.
Something?
We got something.
Okay.
Perfect. In 2013, PT Capital was created. It was really a goal of mine to attract capital to Alaska. At the time, there was a significant amount of interest in Arctic investment. A lot of people globally were interested in Arctic-based projects. And so we really built it on 4 principles. One is to bring capital back home and manage that from our state. The second was to broaden Alaska's financial services industry. I think this is an important goal, mainly because I'm sitting in Reykjavik, Iceland today, and there's approximately 260,000 people in this city, 350,000 in the country. This country currently has 3 national banks, and they currently have probably over 15 private equity firms, 7 or 8 investment banks, highly sophisticated financial services industry. And as I reflect back on Alaska, it is primarily from the financial services serviced out of the lower 48. So it was a significant goal for us to broaden, attract, retain, grow the financial services industry in Alaska. Obviously, if you're going to be in business and you're going to be an investor, you must act as a good corporate citizen, and that's front and center for our firm. And then finally, it's really just creating value by leveraging our team's operational excellence, financial expertise, and implementing best practices. You put all these 4 pieces together, and if you go to the next slide, and let's just wait and hold our breath to see if it happens. Here we go. Today, this is the team of PT Capital. We're primarily based in Anchorage, Alaska. Certainly COVID has put challenges on challenges and opportunities from a talent standpoint. And this team today is 90% based here in Anchorage, Alaska, or over there in Anchorage, Alaska. Very proud of this team, and very proud that this team is able to manage our existing portfolio of 9 companies, over 300 million in asset value, over 1,500 employees, 11 time zones, and really be able to do this under 3 different types of government regulations, 3 different types of currency, and all of those factors. Next slide, please. This is our portfolio today. I'm currently in Iceland. Iceland happens to be where we hold probably our most significant positions. We recently acquired the significant majority position within Nova. Nova is the 2nd largest telecommunications company in Iceland. We have over 155,000 customers, which is just under 50% of the nation is a customer of our company. We provide everything from 5G to 4G, all the way down to 2G mobile service nationwide. We provide fiber to the home and have over 22% market share of fiber to the home. That's grown from 0% 4 years ago. We provide business to business services to over 4,000 firms in Iceland, and from my perspective, is the best telecommunications company in Iceland, very infrastructure heavy. In addition to that, we have over 16 hotel properties, with 3 in development set to open in 2022 and 2023 under the brands of Kea Hotels, which is, I'm at the corporate office here today, and Prime Hotels based in Helsinki, Finland. Certainly, I'll talk a little bit about this further along in the presentation. One sector that has been significantly disrupted by COVID certainly has been the hospitality space, and I'll talk a little bit about pre-COVID, COVID, post-COVID, and maybe what I think is going to happen in the next year or two. As you move over to Alaska, we've got 6 companies, starting at the top, Alpine Air Alaska, alongside a sister company, Vertical Solutions, which was acquired in June of 2020, has approximately 20 helicopters. It's approximately 50% tourism focused, 50% commercial charter focused, and has a base of operations in Girdwood, Merrifield, Anchorage, Valdez, Seward, and soon to be another location to be announced very soon. ICE Services and our partner TJ Broaden primarily services the North Slope of Alaska, providing camp, catering, and contract services to the majors, and is the largest market share provider of those services in the North Slope today. Below that, we've got smaller positions, industrial companies is what I would call those, that are focused on providing services either to the construction or to the export of recycled materials out of the state of Alaska down to the Pacific Northwest. Again, our sectors that we currently have exposure to include tourism, telecommunications and technology, remote logistics, hospitality, industrial services, and aviation. If you could go to the next slide, please. Sitting here in Iceland and just looking at the economy here, this economy is strongly based in government and fisheries and energy, primarily renewable energy. They've got a strong presence in tourism, which has grown substantially over the last decade. And if you were to take those sectors, those primarily make up the Alaska market, and to a certain extent, the Nordic markets. And so as an investment thesis, if you walk down the street, if you meet with people in business here in Reykjavik, the economic footprint has many similar themes, which I believe makes it quite, it gives you a quite good base of knowledge doing business in the harsh Arctic regions of the world. I think the other piece of it is where we operate tends to be smaller markets, where I believe PT Capital was the first investor into Iceland in the private markets post financial crash of 2008, 2009. Today, there is substantial inflow of foreign capital into the markets from Europe and the United States. And so we're proud to say that we were among the first to recognize Iceland as a growing market. Next slide, please. These are some statistics that I think if you were to sort of chalk up your impact as a firm, we sort of said that over the course of our short history, we've brought over $80 million of outside capital into Alaska, invested in Alaska. We've got over 450 employees within our portfolio companies in Alaska. 33 million in payroll expenses annually of Alaskan portfolio companies, 12 million to Alaska lenders, 3 million paid to Alaska vendors. Those are third-party due diligence providers, consultants, those types of folks. 13 million in payroll paid from PT Capital to its employees, and it currently employs 7 financial service professionals. What I like to highlight here is I believe over the course of the next decade, we will see a lot more financial service focused firms, hopefully employing more Alaskans, attracting people to Alaska as people are working from remote locations, and increasing this piece of sector in the Alaska market to where it's one of the larger employers. Next slide, please. Going to get a little into the trends we're seeing. As we all know, working from home for 18 months or 20 months and now being back out on the road, the online retail growth was put into fast forward from 2019 to 2020. In the US, seeing a 14% increase in total retail sales. And if you mirror that against rural Alaska, specifically Anchorage to Bethel, Aniak, Unalakleet, Nome, Kotzebue, Barrow, Dead Horse, McGrath, Dillingham, and King Salmon. If you aggregate those key markets for freight, which includes e-commerce sales as well as bypass mail and general freight, from 2017 to trailing 12-month June 2021, that has seen a 44% growth rate in freight to rural locations within the state of Alaska. The number is astounding: 66 million pounds of freight versus 45 million pounds of freight in 2017. That's really been driven by the fact that today, most of rural Alaska has access to high-speed broadband. GCI has deployed their Terra network to over 70 communities in Western Alaska. There has been recently low Earth orbit satellite provisions throughout Alaska, especially rural locations, which now gives another point of access. We've seen Quintillion roll out fiber to many locations along the Bering Sea, and we've seen increased cooperation among telecommunication companies to bring high-speed broadband and the benefits of that to rural Alaska. We believe this trend is going to continue, and the e-commerce trend of shopping from Costco.com, Walmart.com, Target.com, Amazon will be a substantial driver as this continues. Next slide, please. Innova, which is our company based here in Reykjavik. I find this slide astounding. In January 2019, our customers used an average of just under 11 gigabits of data per month. In September of 2021, the most recent numbers that I had my hands at, that increased to 17 gigabits, which is a 60% growth during that time. In addition to that, we provide fiber to the home, which is essentially a broadband to the home. And we were at 430 gigabits of information per month to a household, to the point where in September of 2021, we are approaching 675 gigabits. All of this is being driven by work from the home, video streaming, social media, gaming. For a long period of time, our kids were at home going to school. This usage, we've actually seen a slight drop in October, and I believe that that's because we've started to see folks, at least on the fiber usage and the mobile usage, get more normal and more back to a normal lifestyle. But we are planning for continued 60% growth over the course of the next 2 years, because we need to have the bandwidth available to support our customer base of 155,000 of customers here in Iceland. Next slide, please. The energy imbalance. I think the story here is with the increased attention towards ESG investing, environmental, social, and governance good practices. You've seen a 26% drop in oil and gas investment into the traditional exploration of oil and gas from pre-pandemic levels. It's mainly being driven by pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, other large institutional investors, and even banks in the United States who have now said they're not going to invest into carbon burning traditional industries. At the same time, you saw a significant dive in the amount of energy that was being burnt. People weren't driving cars, planes weren't flying generally, cruise ships weren't cruising. There was just a lack of usage of traditional energies. That drop pulled back energy companies. Energy companies today are now ramping up the price of Brent crude, which is correlated to ANS crude, is exceeding $80 a barrel. At the same time, we see an energy imbalance on the next slide for the first time in quite some time, where there is more worldwide consumption than there is supply, which means that we're going to see continued high energy prices through 2021 into 2022. What I think this means is that for rural Alaska and for Alaskans in generally, and frankly Americans, is you will see higher gas prices, you will see higher energy prices. It will be more expensive to heat your home, and that trend potentially could last throughout the 2020s as there becomes a gap in investment dollars for traditional oil and gas exploration. We've also seen lately from the Biden administration real hesitance to allowing oil and gas exploration on federal lands, specifically the MPRA, which now from portfolio exposure for us, we're starting to see some real hesitance or potential hesitance amongst the majors and the minor explorers to spend significant amounts of money towards development of new projects, which again does not bode well for the Alaska economy, and frankly will mean increased energy prices for the consumer. And those at the last mile, those in rural Alaska and Bethel, which is dependent, and Nome, which is dependent on diesel to heat their homes, will see inflationary effects to their household income. Next slide, please. Probably what's aged me the most and given me the most gray hair is Kea Hotels and Prime Hotels. Pre-COVID in 2019, and this is just a snapshot, Kea Hotels is an Iceland company. Prime Hotels is a Finland company. we were at 89% in occupancy in KA hotels, and where you have a much more leveled annual occupancy because of business travel in the mainland Europe, we were at 61% at prime hotels. In July of 2020, I vividly recall sitting in my home office in Girdwood and on Microsoft Teams or Zoom calls, trying to figure out exactly how to keep these companies' balance sheets and forward-looking solid. We have managed to do both with both of these companies, strengthening the balance sheet, restructuring our relationships with our lessors, government support from the Iceland government, from the Finnish government, and from the US government to retain as many employees as we could retain. And I have to say that I was talking to the foreign minister of finance here in Iceland. Their support for industry, specifically the tourism sector during COVID, was astounding. This year in July of 2021, we were at 88%, which approaches our July of 2019 number. 90% of the tours that showed up in Iceland were Americans, and those Americans were spending more money. Previous to COVID, they were staying an average of 6 days. This summer, they stayed an average of 11 days. They spent more money, they stayed longer, they ate at more restaurants, they tended to extend their experience. I anticipate that trend into 2022 as Europe starts to see the Delta variant alleviate, that we'll see more Europeans traveling to Iceland, and we will continue to see the trend of Americans coming to Iceland. I'm happy to hear that Iceland Air is resuming their Anchorage to Reykjavik flight in May of 2022, which will allow much more efficient travel and allow Americans and Alaskans to enjoy Europe and perhaps a stopover here in Iceland. What we saw in the mainland Europe was a much more muted rebound this summer, where the EU tended to lock down longer, tended to keep bars and restaurants closed, tended to keep people home. I sort of explain this as Iceland has had a response, perhaps more akin to Alaska, maybe Texas, maybe Florida, where they kept travel going, they kept the borders open, and they kept folks in business. In mainland Europe, in Germany, France, Finland, many of those, the UK, they tended to close borders and close restaurants, close bars, which then really muted the rebound. Though, as we look to 2022, their vaccination rates are amongst the highest in the world. They have now pretty much opened all the borders in Europe, and I believe 2022 probably has a much better year for those in the tourism sector than 2021. Next slide, please. What we did see in the US in 2021 was a rebound to about 841 billion in total spend from 681, and then pre-COVID level of just over 1.1 trillion. So we are starting to see the rebound in the United States of total travel spend. We saw that in 2021. A lot of folks had extra disposable income because they hadn't been traveling and they hadn't been spending a lot of money. And if you go to the next slide, what we saw specifically for our tourism, I'm gonna skip this one because I think it's a little bit in the weeds, but what we saw for our tourism in Alaska for 2021, for our company that primarily is a tourism focused flight scene company, Alpine Air, based out of Girdwood, was if we saw 79% growth in heli tours, so those are heli flight scene tours, and a 38% growth in dog sled bookings. So that's taking a helicopter up to Glacier and with the CV family spending an hour and a half exploring the glacier with the dog sled tour. We have never in the history of this company before our ownership or during our ownership have seen such an immense amount of business. And I know those other companies in Alaska, whether you were in the hotel business, restaurant business, if you had any exposure to the tourism sector, you were faced with the fact that it was very difficult to hire and attract talent, coupled with a massive onslaught of Americans, primarily who showed up in Alaska, decided to come here and spend a significant amount of money, and created what I would call a perfect storm for these employees. I know that my employees at Alpine are exhausted. We had a significant amount of folks that just could not make it through the season because of the 12, 14-hour days, shortage of personnel. And I know everyone is sort of looking to 2022 and saying, we've got to prepare for 2022. We need people, we need resources, because we cannot get through another year like that and keep customers happy, focus on safety, focus on customer experience without having the resources necessary to manage that. So our expectation in 2022 is that we will continue to see a rebound in Alaska. Certainly, all of this is with the disclaimer that certainly it's been unpredictable as to the Delta variant, the fact that now we're seeing boosters required here in Iceland. There's a surge. I think they had 180 cases yesterday, which is the highest since the peak of COVID. Now the goal is to get everyone a booster shot here in this nation by March of 2022. In Alaska, I do know I'm an Alaska Native beneficiary. 10 days ago, the Alaska Native health system provided me a booster shot, which I think is probably now our new normal as we look to one, live life from a normal perspective, and to protect our populations, keep our hospitals not full of COVID patients, and try to manage through this new reality. Certainly the cost of doing business has gone up. Inflation in the US was 6.5% last month. Inflation in Iceland was 5.1%. That's being hit in import expense. So goods and services being imported both into Alaska and to Iceland. Things are more expensive. Wages have gone up. Energy costs have gone up. And supply chain disruptions have caused spikes in pricing. You put all those pieces together, and you really have a difficult, for those of you in business trying to budget for 2022, it's a difficult exercise to be able to try to predict what your budget is going to look like for 2022 until you actually get into the year and start experiencing supply chain alleviation, perhaps, or continued supply chain disruption, additional the great resignation, or do people start showing back up to work? All of these factors, I know business owners today are just trying to figure out exactly how to prepare yourself and create enough of a buffer on your balance sheet that you can weather an additional storm. So that's I think that's where my head's at today, and I know a lot of business owners are there. With that, that's the end of my slides. I don't know if I went too long or if I went too short, but certainly would be they'll be available for questions, and happy to try and answer anything.
Well, Hugh, that was a great presentation. Thank you so much for everything that you shared with us today. We do have some questions that we've prepared, and we're encouraging folks who are in the call to put your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get to those right after I get through a few questions of our own. Hugh, I want to start out with just a real simple, straightforward one. Are there industries or sectors in Alaska that don't get the attention and investment that they warrant from your point of view?
Well, I think the oil and gas sector right now, the folks are in that sector are really struggling to raise capital. If you are putting, probably the biggest transaction out there in 2021 was the merger between Santos and Oil Search, with two Australian firms, which now have created the second or first, I can't recall, second or first largest energy company in Australia. The Pica project is a significant project, significant barrels of oil, but it is required that they go out and tap the capital markets and institutional investors. And as I have shown you, 26% drop in investment into traditional oil and gas from pre-pandemic levels. Will that trend continue? I feel that, money chases return. There's return there. Money will come back, but it's probably going to be more expensive money, meaning that the cost of capital, either on the valuation side and the dilution that's created, or if it's debt sourced, is going to be more expensive because of the, it's just supply and demand, is going to affect the economics on the margins of those types of projects. Beyond that, are there sectors that could use more investment? I think the tourism sector, some folks, especially on the cottage industry or mom and pop side, really struggled. I think the US government did a great job of supporting those folks. Many of those provisions have lapsed, and many of those folks are now going into November, December, January, February, March, April, May with very little revenue and trying to survive until June, July, and August of next year. And so I wouldn't be surprised if that whole part of our economy is going to need some level of either government intervention or private lenders or private investors or institutional investors come in and try and figure out a solution to be able to keep those folks afloat. A couple thoughts off the top of my head on that.
Okay. What advice do you have for the entrepreneurs and business owners in our audience that have an opportunity they want to talk to investors about?
Yeah, I would say, in Alaska, it's a tough place to raise money. Just be honest, it's just a small population. Our financial services sector, as I compared, say, Iceland with its 3 national banks, 15 private equity funds, multiple venture capital funds, very strong support for the startup to the mature to the large company in all stages of the life cycle. Where Alaska really lacks is the ability for the entrepreneur at the startup level to attract capital. And I know there's a number of people working on that. At the mature company level, I believe that there is an opportunity in our market and in small markets for reducing G&A and consolidation in certain sectors where 2 smaller companies come together, create a larger footprint, and then create more profitability through just growth. And financial stress will push firms to do that. My advice to those folks, whether you're early stage, is at that stage you got to have really good data, and you got to have a good team and a good story, and it's got to be well put together, well prepared, well researched, because investors who do that well really are investing into character and team and idea. And that's not something I'm good at. There's very smart people that do that. If you're a mature company, really putting together what the growth capital or the divestiture story is, and trying to get some good advisors to help put that story together, I think is critically important. I will say my sense is the Alaska banking sector, and there's some great banks in Alaska, and shout out to the great banks, and you know who you are, but as a comparable to either Europe, Iceland, or the lower 48, our banking sector is very conservative, slow moving, and generally very, very difficult for companies who want to grow. And so I think that that's a real hindrance for the Alaska of growth, is we have a much slower moving banking sector, though there's a few outliers out there that I think are doing an incredible job.
Okay. I got one more question, and then I'm going to check and see if we've got questions from our audience. This is kind of a fun one. The intersection of politics and the economy is frequently a topic of conversation in the business community. Your past experience as mayor of Bethel for 2 years is something that you don't often see in the business community. How does that experience inform the decisions and strategies at PT Capital?
Yeah, I don't know if that's a fun question. I don't know if I call it fun. I'll just tell a brief story. We are in the midst here in Iceland of, GCI a number of years ago sold off all their passive tower assets. So if you drive around Anchorage and you see like big gray towers with a bunch of radios hung off them, GCI sold those. And they lease back. So it's a sale lease back. We are in the midst of selling our tower assets here in Iceland. So it's 440 something sites, and retaining the radios, the active network, getting cash proceeds, and then entering into a long-term lease on those assets. The government here in Iceland has something called the Competition Authority, which means any transaction gets reviewed by the government to see if it's anti-competitive. And I would say that in this market, because people love to hunt here, people love to fish, they have a short season, it's 8 o'clock at night, and this is the latitude of Fairbanks here, so it's dark, it's cold out, people are layered up, is that my background specifically, I think, allows me to actually understand local politics a bit more, even though I don't speak the language. I don't profess to understand the culture 100%. But the intersection of business and government is pervasive in our society globally. And if you do not have a good government strategy and you pick a sector like telecommunications, which is heavy government involvement, you're not going to be well set for success. And so I would say my brief and being mayor of Bethel for 2 years is definitely a little light in the political resume, but it was a heavy casualty zone. Let me just tell you that. Prepared me somewhat for being able to handle some of the work that I do as a private equity manager.
Well, thanks for those responses and these great answers to these questions that we put forward. I want to turn it over to Kate right quick. Kate, do we have any questions from the audience?
We do, and thank you, Hugh, for such a great presentation. We do have a couple of questions. What is the most important lesson that Alaska's investment industry could learn from Iceland's investment industry?
Yeah, I think, I'm gonna say that in Alaska we tend not to work together well, and there is the collaboration, whether you're in the banking sector, in the private equity sector, in the investment sector. I believe if you compare if you had a collaboration index, so maybe you said deals done and number of participants in the deal working together, the collaboration index in Alaska would be much lower than the collaboration index in Iceland. There's a public market here. It's a NASDAQ affiliate. There's 18 publicly traded companies. They enjoy access to a cheaper cost of capital, a large retail investor base, certainty of certain things. And in Alaska, we are today still somewhat a colony to the lower 48 and the decision makers in Minneapolis, Seattle, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles. And much of that is preventing Alaska from growing smart investors and smart finance professionals. And we need to become proud, patriotic, and collaborate versus try to put each other down or try to in some way not support each other, because it's hard. We live in a hard location. It's already hard enough to figure out how to do it. And if you can't call someone up and just say, hey, what do you think? Can you help me out? Or can you give me some ideas? It just makes it that much harder. So I think Alaska could learn the collaboration index a lot better than, say, this location.
Right, thank you. Here's another question. Referring to Hugh's comments about the Alaska banking industry being conservative and slow moving. Your comments are not the first we've heard about the less than agile nature of our Alaskan financial institutions, but how does that begin to change?
Let me just give this example. PT Capital is a private equity firm. There's thousands of private equity firms in the United States and thousands more in the world. Private equity firms do not provide a guarantee to the bank. It's called non-recourse lending. And if you go to Seattle, if you go to the lower 48, many of these banks have a private equity lending practice. And that's what they do. In Alaska, if you go to, and I'm not going to name any names here, but if you go to a bank, they're going to say, well, we need a guarantor for this loan. If you're a private equity investor who has 20 LPs and you're a GP and they're all limited partners and you're a general partner, there's no one in that bunch of investors that is going to guarantee the note. The corporation will guarantee the performance, but the bank's looking for, Joe Smith to sign on the line to say, if this loan goes bad, I personally will make it whole, right? That's banking from 1980 and 1990 in Alaska. We've got over, let's call it $250 million of assets, both equity and debt in this nation. And I have never been asked as an investor in these companies to provide a guarantor for any of these notes. The bankers compete for the business, and it is a very competitive process. And we have I like to think, I'm not trying to brag, but I think we have a great reputation of working with these banks. And so I think, that's one small piece of Alaska, really Alaska finance industry really not recognizing that the global economy has changed. Something like 40% of all investment in the world is now from private equity or private equity-like investments. And if you're not supporting that 40% and you're just focusing on the 60%, which is the legacy investors and large families and large vertically integrated companies, if that's all you're focused on, you're leaving a chunk of investment out, and that prevents growth and that stunts economic output. So I think that's just one factor that I see.
All right, and here's our last question. As Alaskans, we tend to think of ourselves and our state as unique, but what areas of the world could we benefit from looking at in terms of strategies or developing key partnerships?
The world thinks we're unique. That's the weird thing. Like our ability to go out and raise capital to invest in the Arctic because we're unique and weird. Like, well, you do business in Iceland and Alaska and Finland. That's unique and different. I think the opportunity is for us to better tell our story, better articulate our investment opportunities, better align the financial service participants, whether you're on the banking side or the private investment side, better collaborate and find those investors, whether they're sovereign wealth funds, institutions, family offices, and really bring in new capital that creates jobs. Alaska needs to do this. As much as I'm a supporter of the oil industry and bullish on the oil industry in Alaska, we have to recognize that over the next 50 years, it's not going to have the impact it has today. It's just not. The global push for carbon neutral or no carbon emitting energy is insurmountable, only gets stronger, and will only be harder to fight. And so we better figure out new industries, new technologies, new ways to grow. And that's by attracting capital to our unique story and doing a better job of articulating, selling, and bringing that capital back home.
All right, thank you. Those are our questions from the audience.
Okay. Thank you so much.
I think we've really covered a lot of ground in a very short period of time, and we cannot thank you enough for taking time out of your busy day, busy evening, to spend this time with us, to share your views with us, and to give us a glimpse of some of the insights that you have in terms of what's going on in the world around us, as well as your views on what's happening in Alaska in your field of expertise. Thank you so much for joining us today, Hugh. Deeply, deeply appreciate you giving us this very generous amount of your time.
Well, Bill, thank you for what you're doing. And you provide a great forum. And I think this is an important forum for people to share information. I really appreciate the opportunity. Look forward to seeing you all in person very soon.
Absolutely. Be safe out there. Enjoy the rest of your day. Folks online, know that our today's presentation will be available. And we've recorded it, and it will be available in the coming days. Just watch for the notice, share it with your friends. We'll be putting the word out to our thousands of followers. This is a great resource, and we've got some great speakers coming up in the coming months. So with that, I want to again thank our good friends at AES and BMG, Alaska People. You know, I just am having a moment here. I'm still getting used to this new title. Alaska People. Yeah. But it's great. Thank you so much for the generous sponsorship and the support that you give us. And to everybody who joined us today, thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you again at next month's AEDC Voice.
Take care.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.